Alright, men, this place will do. We're going to set up camp here for the night. Wait until morning to finish the march. Alright, let's go. Oh. What's that? There's something over here. Oh, you're from the future, aren't you? But time travel's impossible. How are you visiting in from the future? And why would you choose to come here? Alright, well, guess I believe you. Alright, you men finish setting up camp. I'm gonna chat with the future. So, I've come to hear tales from this time, 1863. We're over here in Pennsylvania, and we just achieved a major victory at Gettysburg. Oh yeah, very good. Well, want to learn about the past? You've come to the right place. Welcome, future. Oh, anyway. Hello, future. Yes, Gareth here. And I just want to say, you know, first of all, isn't it just so beautiful? You know, I have a few bags right over there. You'll see what's in them soon. And it is literally the closest I'll ever get to time traveling. And I want you, future, to join me as we go back to the American Civil War. So, let us begin. I'm going to start with explaining the history first. Then, that's better, I shall explain the attire. So, I'm doing this video in spirit of missionism, the great mission to identify the momentum of the past so that we understand where we are today. So it is a very scientific mission that I'm on. I want to be very scientific about it, understanding what happened exactly in the past and how it affected the world today. And one such way of doing that is, of course, making the outfits and putting yourself in the shoes of those in history. A great way to identify past momentum. And I have brought actual rations as measured and delivered to soldiers in the US Civil War over there, which we're gonna have a taste adventure very soon. Another great way to try and, I wouldn't say create a bridge between us and the past, because I do believe that the past is gone. It's extinct. It doesn't exist. But its momentum is still felt today, the effects. So to try and understand how it is affected today, you can actually tap into the evidence we have left. And we have a lot of evidence left from the US Civil War. So without further ado, where I'm from, a lot of people, most people have sort of heard about it, but I don't know, everyone knows Abraham Lincoln, but it's fairly rare you'll bump into someone here who can explain from Fort Sumter up until Appomattox. So yeah, and I know that many of my audience here with the YouTube channel also probably don't know much about the US Civil War. Some of you might, and I really hope I have some people watching who do know. So I'd love to hear from you. And then of course I will explain the attire and what the US Civil War soldier on the Union side wore, and I will touch on the Confederacy too, and then we'll end off with an amazing surprise, the food. So let us begin. The American Civil War. What was it and how did it begin? So I always believe that to understand an event you need to go even further back to understand its context. Ultimately, everything goes back to the beginning of the universe and even all the various eons of Earth. This typical soldier that I am from the US Civil War had ancestry in the Hadean eon when Earth was molten lava. The atoms literally forged what would become this person. But we would be here all day. So more immediate context is we actually can go back to the New World. Of course, as we learned in my 70,000 BC reenactment, that humans spread out of Africa 70,000 BC. It was relatively late, only 10,000 BC, when Homo sapiens entered the Americas, when they crossed the land bridge from Kamchatka, Russia, into Alaska and the rest of the Americas. So it was quite recent, and these people would become what Europeans would call the Native Americans, and they would also become the Inca Empire, the Aztecs, the Mayans. So I've already covered on the Incas, as you will see, done the Inca reenactment. But basically, North America, we're now in North America, was settled by these Homo sapiens who had entered 10,000 BC. And theirs is a beautiful, long history as well, which I hope to touch on. But let's just say that the Spanish have arrived in South America and have opened up the New World to Europe. And this is the end of the 1400s, beginning of the 1500s. It was only a century later that the English have arrived in the New World, North America. One of the first major establishments was that of Jamestown in 1620, when predominantly the Puritans had arrived, and many other people from England trying to escape persecution by the Catholic Church. And they had established Jamestown and founded Virginia, which was named after the Virgin Queen. And Maryland was named after Queen Mary, I seem to recall. So the seeds of the United States are now beginning, and you find that the settlers, the English settlers, would continue to spread, keep on going westwards and westwards. And eventually these colonies would become quite successful, and they would be trading in back with the home motherland of Britain. So they were British colonies. Yeah, so the British Empire was really in full fruition at the end of the 1600s and come the 1700s. Now, you find that the settlers who were working the land in North America, especially cotton in the South, they found that they needed more labor, and it so happened that West Africa was opened. Hello there, you've been a naughty dog with your muzzle. Howdy there. So it turned out that West Africa was also open to the Europeans, and they'd been bringing in slaves from West Africa into North America. And so many slaves were brought in that it literally started a whole new population. There were so many that up to about, during the time of the US Civil War, about 4.5 million people were enslaved. African descended people were in bondage. That's millions of people. So over the decades, more and more people were brought in from West Africa. Keep that in mind. Now we're going to go back to Britain and the colonies. Britain is starting to really tax the colonies. This is now American Revolution history, to pay for wars like the 7 Years' War with France. Ridiculous. And the thing is that they are taxing their American colonies without representing them in English Parliament. And it boiled over in 1775 when eventually the Sons of Liberty, a group of men who dressed themselves as Native Americans, took the tea and threw it into Boston Harbor. Literally so many pounds worth of tea that I'm sure the harbor became one giant cup of tea, yes? So anyway, after many years of war, and the next year, 1776, the Declaration of Independence, the colonies declared their independence from the British Empire, but they would only, after over 10 years of war with the British, finally gain their independence, led by George Washington, who became the first president. So even in the Revolution, the seeds to the US Civil War were sown. You know, this idea of United States of America, the fact that it was states, all these states didn't have this idea of being one nation. They all believed they were technically their own countries in a way. So if laws were passed down, the states would have to agree, and some could disagree, and then if there was not enough votes, a law couldn't pass. So yeah, the United States was pretty much just a collection of states somewhat united under federal government. And so yeah, the 1700s turned into the 1800s, and a big important thing is now Louisiana is purchased by the French, from the French, and this has added a new state to the United States. And this is the thing now. So as time keeps on going, and now Missouri in 1820 is now entering the United States. So fast forward to 1820, and Missouri enters the United States. This causes a big problem, because as of the 1820s, Britain is one of the first European nations to abolish slavery. New interpretations of the Bible, as well as many people believing that slavery is actually quite immoral, and also many people who were anti-slavery, not so much abolitionists. I'll explain the difference. They started to theorize that slavery is actually not so beneficial for the economy. It actually is more costly. The northern states are pretty much, it's following Britain's suit, is that they also don't really like slavery. There are many abolitionists in the north, but the south is very different to the north, because unlike the north, who is very industrialized, remember this is the middle of the Industrial Revolution, the north has no problem in letting go of slavery. The south is literally built on slavery. Without slavery, the south the South's economy could not function. Missouri now entering the United States, the big debate is, will Missouri enter as a slave state or as a free state? And the thing is that the South and the North are already balanced. In Congress, if the North tries to press for passing the laws to abolish slavery. If they get Missouri in as a free state, they could have the majority and slavery will be abolished. The South will lose their way of life. So the tensions are beginning now. What ends up happening is called the Missouri Compromise. So Missouri enters as a slave state, being fairly south, and now you go up to Massachusetts. The state of Massachusetts has a big chunk of land that isn't quite connected to, in your perspective, that way. This is Maine. So what they end up doing is, yes, Missouri enters as a slave state, but Maine will split from Massachusetts and enter as a free state. Hence, the balance is restored, things are good in the Union. Except, Texas comes now. So there was the Mexican-American Wars, where basically a big battle was fought between Mexico and America. Mexico had already gone through its own revolution, cast off Spanish control, and that's its own history in itself. Oh gosh, but let's just say that the United States won against Mexico, and this meant that a lot of new territory was added to the Union, which is a nightmare now for the balance, because what's going to happen to all this new territory? Basically, Texas enters in 1845 and becomes a slave state because it is right there on the south. So things are the Mexican-American Wars then happened from 1846 to 48, I think it was. And now a lot of new land, like California now, has entered the Union. As the years go by, the Compromise of 1850 is now passed down. So this is now another fairly futile attempt to try and to create the balance and compromise, but it ends up making both sides angry, the South and the North. I guess it was a compromise, technically, because we made both sides angry. So yes, a bit of both for everyone, yes? And basically what the Compromise of 1850 did was made it so that the Northerners had to report runaway slaves. So if slaves escaped to the North, the Northerners, now it was a federal offense to let them go. They had to be bound by law to report them, which outraged the North. This is now basically as good as saying you're partaking in the slavery if you have to now make the slaves go back, which angered so many people. And I'll explain the difference between abolitionists and anti-slavery. So in the North, there were many people what you call abolitionists. These were people who believed in abolishing slavery. They believed that slavery was immoral. Many of them were Quakers who were very deeply religious, and many of them had prayed for the souls of slaves. So they outright refused. They wanted to see a union without slavery. The Union is another word for the United States. So now, funny enough, Abraham Lincoln starts to enter the picture, and he wasn't an abolitionist. He was anti-slavery. The difference is anti-slavery doesn't necessarily mean you morally disagree with slavery, but you see slavery as being bad because it damages economy. Because many anti-slavery people in the North were put out of jobs because they were simply outcompeted by slave owners. How can you compete with free labor? You can't. So Abraham Lincoln, his father fell victim to this. So Lincoln himself had experienced the damages that slavery can do. But Lincoln knew that he didn't want to aggravate the South. Lincoln's priority was to keep the Union a union. So as the 1850s turn into the 1860s, the elections are now coming up, and James Buchanan is President of America. He knows that he won't retain office because now the rising star is Abraham Lincoln, who's heading the Republican Party. The Republican Party was new. Before that was the Whigs Party, but all of this debating between free states and slave states literally was like a political war. It was violent. And after the Missouri Compromise, people getting angry, and another interesting thing happened was Uncle Tom's Cabin was released. This was a book written about the horrors of slavery, and it literally went viral. It spread all over the North and even into Europe and into England. And people were shocked at what slavery was doing. So the pressure was on to abolish slavery. Many people had left the Whigs Party to create the Republican Party, and Abraham Lincoln was elected head of the Republican Party. Many people wanted to abolish slavery. They said, screw the South, we want to abolish it. But Lincoln knew that the South was angry with the North because they become very defensive after the Uncle Tom's Cabin was released. The South was taking a defensive stance. They felt threatened by the North and destroying their way of life. 1860 elections had now come, November, and Abraham Lincoln has now won the presidency. He is now going to become president. However, there's still 3-4 months between he's actually given powers in March the next year. So for 3 months, James Buchanan is basically sitting there almost powerless as he watches the United States split in half. As soon as Abraham Lincoln becomes president, the first 5 nations of the South secede. They viewed Lincoln as being the last straw that he would destroy their way of life. However, Lincoln, he pleaded to the South, and in his inaugural address said to the whole nation that the South, he will not abolish slavery. He is happy to keep slavery if it means keeping the Union. But his address fell on deaf ears, and the South seceded. And this was technically an illegal secession in the eyes of the North. So yeah, the South had split. The United States was now the divided states of America. So what ends up happening is now you find that many forts that were garrisoned by Northerners in the South are now laid under siege, and most importantly was Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter was laid under siege by the South, and literally it was a washover, whatever the word is. And the South take Fort Sumter, and this is basically, as many people say, the beginning of the American Civil War. The first shots were fired at Fort Sumter. So now what ends up happening is after that, many more nations start to secede, and the South, the nations that seceded become the Confederate States of America, and they elect their own new president, Jefferson Davis. And well, the war's on now. The war has begun. There was a certain man, Robert E. Lee, very important man, remember his name. He was actually asked by the Union to fight for them and to help stop the South insurgency. But after Virginia joined the Confederacy, Robert E. Lee, he was from Virginia, he believed in his home state. He declined the offer and became the South's great general, which was a huge loss to the North. You find that the North was led by George McClellan, and McClellan was a very gentle general. He was very hesitant at putting the troops. He was popular because of that. He didn't want to lose his soldiers, but the thing is that Abraham Lincoln was frustrated with McClellan that he couldn't make decisions. So now the South, and this will explain that this is now the strategy of the Civil War. The South, their goal was to simply outlast the Union. They wanted to win some quick victories and put the Union off of doing war and let them have their secession. They knew that now they had Robert E. Lee, a good general, so they were betting on good leadership as well as home ground advantage. They were in Virginia in the South. They were now fighting on home ground advantage. Now on the other side, the Union, their strategy for dealing with this was they knew that they were 22 million in population. The South was only 9 million, and only like half of that were free, so only half of them would be able to fight. The rest, they knew the slaves, they would never be given arms, which they weren't. The North knew it had the numerical advantage and also the industrial advantage. They knew that they had more railroads, they had more industrialism, trains, capacity to wage war against the South. However, they didn't have as good leadership. So the stakes were pretty much on par with each other. The Union, though, thought that this illegal rebellion will be over by Christmas. So you find that the first months of the Civil War are fought with skirmishes, and it was only until the Battle of Bull Run is fought. The South called it the First Battle of Manassas, named after the town nearby. Bull Run was named after the body of water. So you find that the North and the South, if you ever get confused that battles are called different things, the North and the South simply name them after different things. The North after rivers, the South after towns. Or it could be the other way around. Forgive me, I'll try and put a correction here if I'm wrong. And Bull Run, to the Union's shock and horror, the South won. The South won the first major battle of the US Civil War. This made Lincoln realize that this is no longer just a little rebellion, this is going to be a war, a big conflict. Because with Robert E. Lee, they you know, us Southerners, we had no trouble beating them Northerners, yeah, oh yeah. Well, us Northerners, we were troubled by that. Dear me, Bull Run, oh dear. And Southern rebels. So, yeah, horror. Bull Run, lost to the Union, won by the Confederacy. So you find that time goes by and the North is battling to come up with a victory. And after a year into the war in 1862, Abraham Lincoln realizes that this war really is about slavery. Because another thing that the South was betting on was that England would help them. Because England was importing tons of their cotton. However, England because remember, the eyes of the world were on the US Civil War. The South was hoping that they could appeal to the world to help them, especially England. But England knew that this is going to be troublesome. So they started to, simply being the great British Empire that they were in Victorian times, they just simply switched their cotton source to Egypt and India. Egypt and India were now ramping up their cotton production. So they had a surplus of cotton, so they weren't too fussed about supporting the South and losing them. So yeah, it's the South was banking on European intervention, but Lincoln knew that he had to stop this. Lincoln knew, just like in the American Revolution, they couldn't have done without the help of France against the British. That Lincoln knew that if Europe helps the South, they are going to remain a divided states of America. So Lincoln was very smart. He was very smart. He played his cards very right, in that he actually allowed the South to retain their slavery as long as they joined the Union. And he was very clever in that when he eventually started to, the South declined that, they didn't want to join, so it fell into their fears again. Lincoln started to now write up his Emancipation Proclamation. This was basically a law stating that slaves were now to become free, and that slavery was now outlawed in the United States. So he knew he needed to play it very well. So what he ended up doing was, he knew that the borderlines, the border states like Kentucky and Tennessee had not joined the South, but they were still slave states. So he, in his proclamation, said that only states in rebellion against the North will have to be abolished. Which means he would have allowed the border states to keep their slavery, and this prevented them from joining the South, because he was worried that the border states would join the South if he outlawed slavery point blank. So that was clever. So that meant that kept Kentucky in the north and the other states. So and to stop Britain from helping the Confederacy, is he also outlined that yes, he would follow Britain's suit and abolish slavery. And now Lincoln would make this a war against slavery, because at first it wasn't really a war against slavery. Lincoln allowed slavery, but after the Emancipation Proclamation, this would mean that it was now about slavery, and Britain would now be morally forced to not support the South, since they had abolished slavery already. So very smart. However, Lincoln's generals knew that they couldn't set this in motion without a victory, else it would seem like a desperate measure. So they had to wait for a victory, and that victory came late in the year in 1862 at the Battle of Antietam. This was a great victory for the North, and now they were an army of liberators. So things are still wibbly wobbly. The war could go any way. Since the beginning, they had also been banking on the Anaconda Plan. This was essentially a plan to squeeze the South into starvation and into submission. So they blockaded the southern ports, having a superior navy. This was easy, and the age of ironclads had now entered steamships. Interesting, hey? So, and the other part of the Anaconda Plan was to control the Mississippi River and split the South right in half. because the Mississippi River runs pretty much right in the middle of the South and squeezed the South into submission. This was going all right, but General Lee was such a good general that he was really giving the Union a run for its money. As 1863 comes along, this is the big year. This is the big year. This has all been culminating to Lee's second invasion of the North. He tried to go straight in and hook around, going past the capital, Washington, D.C. Because remember, the capital of the South was Richmond, Virginia. The capital of the North was Washington, D.C. And they were literally 100 miles apart. So this is where the majority of the Civil War battles happened, in that sort of Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, that sort of area. So Lee took his army to try and invade the North and relieve pressure off the South of fighting a war on their home ground. Yes, it was home ground advantage, but you know, if your people are fighting wars instead of harvesting the crops, it causes a problem. So this was a problem, and Union General Meade was put in charge over here, and they eventually, the two armies met at a small town called Gettysburg. Gettysburg was basically a very small little town, and this was where the Union would take their stand against the South coming in. So Meade situated his armies, and basically, in a nutshell, the battle lasted 3 days, from July 1st to July 3rd. The first day was pretty much a stalemate. The South were actually looking like they could win this. It was actually more in the South's advantage. The second day looked like a stalemate. Come the third day, Pickett's charge, where the Southerners charged Union lines to try break them once and for all and win the battle. They suffered 50% casualties, and they were repulsed back. So Pickett's charge was a disaster for the South. And Robert E. Lee now knew that he could not break the North. He, being the smart general he was, pulled back. He knew he was no point in fighting anymore. So Robert E. Lee retreated, and to Lincoln's fury with his generals, just like McClellan, Meade didn't pursue. Meade was slow, and Meade could have ended the war right there if he had actually pursued and taken Lee and stopped him in his tracks. So Lincoln sent an angry letter to Meade, but he recalled his letter and instead congratulated him for the victory at Gettysburg. So you can see there was Lincoln just still hadn't found his golden general. The South, Davis had his general, Robert E. Lee, still needed that guy. Meade had done himself well. So yeah, Gettysburg was a great Union victory and a huge defeat, a huge blow to the South, and this, you could argue, was a turning point. This was now where the South would slowly go down. And only be 3 months later that Abraham Lincoln would give his famous Gettysburg Address, where he would basically galvanize the North and give it renewed spirit in the fight against the South and stopping slavery and freeing America type of thing, you know. We are now in the late war phase. So as 1863 comes to a close, General Grant, one of Lincoln's generals, was in the Western Theater. He had just secured Vicksburg, which basically put a firm grip on the Mississippi River. And this was literally on the 4th of July, 1863. So literally the day after Gettysburg was won by the North, Vicksburg was now won by the North. So good news after good news for the Northerners. With the Mississippi now effectively in Union hands, the South was now split in half and surrounded. So as the war becomes the late war, General Grant is now pulled back to now take Tennessee, and he liberates Tennessee, putting it back into the Union. And then Lincoln can see that Grant is actually a very good general. So Lincoln has now just about found his golden general, General Ulysses Grant. And so he appoints Grant the supreme commander, the chief of the Union armies, and puts him further east to pursue Lee. Lee has now fallen back to Richmond to hold it. Grant is now pursuing him. So the war is sort of in two theaters, Eastern Theater and the Western Theater. In your perspective, the Western Theater, the Eastern Theater, so in the West, with Richmond and Grant, and in the East, the rising stars now General Sherman, and Sherman is now initiating his total war against the South to basically stop the South in its tracks, to cause havoc and destroy as much of the war effort as he can, while Grant pursues Lee. And it is super successful. Sherman basically plows into the South, and then he initiates his march to the sea, which is basically a 16-mile wide swathe of destruction to go back to the sea to surround Virginia. And he cuts right through Georgia, and it's devastating. Very much unlike McClellan, who was very hesitant. Sherman, opposite. September, Sherman takes Atlanta, Georgia. So Georgia is now basically lost for the South. And 1864 spells are very, very dark here for the Confederacy, because basically Robert E. Lee is now holed up in Richmond. Anaconda Plan has now taken its toll, and the South is basically starving. It doesn't have enough supplies. It's looking more and more grim each passing day. On the more political side, the South, the elections are coming in, so the South is hoping that Lincoln will be ousted again, and hopefully a more pro-slavery president will come into power, but that doesn't happen. This is the first election since the War of 1812 that happened during wartime. So soldiers can now cast their votes. So Lincoln wins. McClellan runs for the Democrat Party. Lincoln gets the vote. And this, again, another nail in the coffin of the South. And basically the war ends where 1865 comes in, and Robert E. Lee is still holding out in Richmond. Grant is now going in for the kill. Lee actually retreats from Richmond and heads west to Petersburg. Grant is chasing him on his tail. He keeps going west until Lee reaches a place at Appomattox where Grant catches him. Lee realizes, you know what, Grant is expecting a battle now at Appomattox, but Lee says, you know what, we can't win this war. So Lee officially surrenders Virginia and his army to General Grant. He even invites Grant into the Appomattox courthouse, and this is basically, many people say, the end of the US Civil War. But what's incredible is that many southern states still fought on for the next many months. It was only until November 1865 that the last Confederates would surrender, and that was actually a ship that sailed into Liverpool in England, and they surrendered. Crazy, hey? And so yeah, April 1865 spelled the end of the American Civil War, with the last, well, not the last, but the major armies of the South surrendering. And Lincoln visited a theater house. He was a fan of the theater. He even knew this man called John Wilkes Booth. Abraham Lincoln, after finding out of Lee's surrender, gave a great address. There was celebration all over the North. And in Lincoln's address, he basically said many things about, victory, but also that slaves will now be able to obtain citizenship in the United States. Not all of them, but many of them will be able to obtain citizenship. This actor that Lincoln, he even had admiration for, John Wilkes Booth, heard the speech and he was angered by it. Basically, John Wilkes Booth was an actor, and he was a Confederate sympathizer. He believed in slavery. So from that day, after hearing Lincoln's address, decided that he would kill Lincoln. He and a few followers had decided to assassinate many high-ranking people in the federal government. And so on April 14th, 1865, as Lincoln was in the theater watching a play, John Wilkes Booth walking up, everyone said, "Oh, hey John. They knew him, Lincoln knew him, he was a respected man." Went straight up to Lincoln's viewing deck, opened the door, closed it, drew a pistol, fired at the back of Lincoln's head, killing him. Allegedly, John Wilkes Booth jumped off, ran off, and he got away, but eventually he was caught. But he didn't want to surrender, so he was shot and killed. And as to the rest of the conspirators, they were all found and hanged. And apparently only Lincoln was killed in the federal government, despite them trying to kill many of the high-ranking people. But with the assassination of Lincoln, Booth had hoped that the South would have it easier after losing. Booth had actually initially planned to capture Lincoln, use him as leverage against the South, against the North, so that maybe the South could keep its secession. But after Virginia, Lee surrendered, Booth knew he would just kill Lincoln. And actually, this would basically, President Johnson now, Andrew Johnson, was now next in line, sworn in. Funny enough, Johnson actually was slightly sympathetic to the Confederates, so this caused problems in that, yeah, many Federals believed that they needed to be hard. Even Lincoln wasn't hard enough on the South, but Johnson was a bit lenient. But yeah, basically, yeah, this was the US Civil War. And the incredible thing, some big takeaways from the US Civil War, is it led to the abolishment of slavery. Another big thing is it led to the beginning of the United States of America as we know it today. You see, before the US Civil War, people viewed America as being, they said, you know, these states, these United States. The shift went from these United States to the United States. Lincoln was many times heard to be called, to call it the nation. So it went from a shift of being a collection of states all united to actually being one solid nation. Another thing that this led to was the empowerment of women. So women took on a greater role after during the American Civil War. Their use in society was exponential. So they started to take a rise, and this would even ultimately lead to the suffragette movement, which was in England, but you know, the US Civil War helped that as well. Another big takeaway was it led to the industrialism of the United States. So the United States, having even furthermore industrialized to combat the South, all these roads they had built, well, now they could be used for the economy. So this was another step into leading to America becoming a world global superpower. So yeah, that was a summary of how it went. So without further ado, again, I shall now explain the attire and what the soldier wore. Whew, I haven't eaten enough today. I can't wait to eat some rations, hey? But like I say, this is part of the immersion. We'll get to that now, but first the attire. The attire of a northern soldier from the United States Civil War. I've got bad pins and needles. Oh, okay, let me get the stuff now. Oh, I got shot by the Confederates. Oh, gosh, ow. So, ladies and gentlemen, the attire of a Union soldier from the US Civil War is that of the color of blue. So, northern soldiers were nicknamed Billy Yank, and southern soldiers were nicknamed Johnny Reb. Reb short for rebel. The Yankees and the rebels wore their distinct colors. So the Confederates wore uniforms of gray, while the North wore uniforms of blue. So I have a Confederate impression, but it still needs a lot of work. So maybe I'll do a separate video about that. But I got a Confederate surprise for you, a little piece of history that I'll save for later. Stay tuned for that. So the uniform of a Union soldier comprised of navy blue tunic with brass buttons and sky blue trousers. So you get varying colors and hues. This is a more darker color. I've seen some pictures of them, but more common you get quite a light blue color. So yeah, it just depends. Before I go on, I want to say that I also do this video in the spirit of yes, missionism and identifying the momentum of the past, but also to all of you out there who are not in the United States like I am, and you don't have access to all these really nice reenactment companies. You can just buy stuff. Maybe this outfit can give you some hope if you want to try out US Civil War reenactment yourself. Is that this outfit is 100% homemade, except for the shoes, the pants, and the tunic is half homemade because I did all the buttons myself. I sewed them and slit the buttonholes to be accurate. I had taken a jacket that looked similar to a sack coat and just requisitioned it. So this is not ideal if you want to be 100% authentic, but this is good for if you don't have what it takes. So that's for you out there. I want to personally actually buy navy wool and make it out of wool to the exact pattern because this is actually sadly polyester. Union soldiers, Confederate soldiers, all of them would have worn wool. Wool in the middle of July in the United States, yep, they would have gotten very hot. But better that than having your clothes tearing when getting down and hiding for your life, because wool is very strong. Cotton wool rips easy, and if it's a very cold night, you're gonna literally regret being in cotton. You get some southerners especially wearing cotton because they produce a lot of it, but typically your soldier would be issued wool. So this is polyester, sorry about that. However, the tunic you see is modeled after a sack coat. So Union soldiers wore three main types of tunics. The first is the shell jacket, the second is the frock, and the third is the sack coat. So mine is the third, a sack coat. But the first was the shell jacket, which basically goes up about this short. Maybe a bit longer. And it would have about, I think, 9 buttons on it. The shell jacket was quite cool. The frock was standard issue. This was the standard issue service jacket tunic for soldiers. The frock went quite low. It actually went a bit lower than this, and would also have 9 buttons, but it would be piped with sky blue piping, and the collar was not a collar like you see here. It was a simple staying up collar like that was piped as well. That thing was very fancy and smart, which leads me to the third, the sack coat, which was the most popular tunic worn by northern soldiers. Because the sack coat, the 4-button sack coat, that's how you know it's a sack coat, it only has 4 buttons, was loose fitting and very comfortable. This was technically the fatigue dress, so this was just used for if you're doing manual labor and camp and stuff, but you find into battle they would wear this, ditch the frock. So yeah, sack coats. The sack coat should actually be a little bit shorter than this, probably like this. It's just lower than the sleeve. Mine is sadly quite a long sack coat. And also, the problem is you can see the previous buttonholes. The buttonholes were previously on this side, but you have all the US Civil War tunics. The buttonholes were on the left side. Underneath, the northern soldier would wear, okay, they were issued very scratchy shirts. They were ditched, mostly just ditched. Soldiers prefer to wear their own cotton undershirts, so they would wear their civilian undershirts like this. This is sadly my Great Depression shirt, but it's pretty similar to the pattern that was used in the 1860s. You see quite commonly wearing checkered shirts. So yeah, and paired with suspenders. Yeah, there we go. Suspenders was the way of keeping your pants up in the US Civil War. You see many pictures of soldiers just doing the top button. It became quite a fashion trend, you know. Yeah, how you doing there? How you doing? I'm from New York. Yeah, yeah. Interesting. And now another very important item of the attire is, just do my 4th button. Yeah, I think I need to shift the buttons. I need to unstitch and re-sew them to hide the previous buttonholes. It's so frustrating. I'm sorry about that, future. Oh, sorry about that. The forage cap or cappy. So the main hat worn in the US Civil War was the cappy. It was basically a cap similar to this, but it was much, it didn't have this big chunk of material. It was pretty much just sewn in like that. It could stretch maybe this high. That was the main hat worn. It was standard issue. You find that in Europe, the shako was used in Napoleon's time. Shakos are tall, very cumbersome. So armies all over Europe are switching to the cappy, including France. And America, being old allies with France, is like, you know what, this is quite nice. Let's adopt the cappy. And then a variant of the cappy was produced called the forage cap, and this is the forage cap. I will explain why it's called the forage cap when we do the food. But let's just say that it was used by soldiers to go foraging around for food, and they would put it inside. It just allowed for extra space, and when put on, it creates quite that fashion statement, yes? Does anyone know where the term "don't get cocky" comes from? It comes from the US Civil War. Soldiers, many of them, especially the hip ones, like me, yeah, Private Gary, I'm hip, that's my US Civil War name, Private Gary. Soldiers would cock their hats to the side, to the right usually, giving it attitude. And so hence the term "don't get cocky," that's where it comes from. Cocky? No, I'm not cocky, I'm just, sticking to the fashion trends of the time. Oh yeah. I'm not really that type of soldier, or am I? You see pictures of soldiers with their hats at ridiculous angles, like yeah, that's ridiculous. How are you going to fight like this? So I prefer to have it like this, personally. If you're in war, you want your hat to stay on. I would keep it just like this, but maybe give it a little bit of attitude to conform a bit to, being in camp over here, How's the camp going? You guys building it, yes? Oh dear. Yeah, you see what I have to deal with. This is what I have to deal with. My soldiers, they're doing nothing. What was worn in the US Civil War, I'll try to put up some pictures, would have been, I'll try to put up some pictures, booties and brogans. So brogans, they basically look just about like this. I'm using just a pair of normal 21st century leather shoes. Black, they have to be black. You don't see the South a little bit more lenience with having natural brown shoes, but the North pretty much all blackened shoes. So yeah, this you could count as a brogan. Simple, and funny enough, just like Napoleonic times, Napoleonic shoes were not made for 2 feet. They were the same, 1 foot for each, 1 shoe for each foot. So they were straight. The US Civil War, I have seen conflicting things. I'm going to put it to you. I'm sorry. I've seen some people, reenactors, say nope, they were like Napoleonic, but I've seen some that are too. So I don't have shoes that are Napoleonic, so I'm using these. Another option, if you want to go for the more DIY outfit, school shoes. If you're in a place where they wear school uniforms, you can just use school shoes. Very nice. They look very similar to booties, which are the ankle length, but if you wear gaiters, it hides the fact they're not ankle length. Or they could just be very fancy brogans, unlike these pretty worn out ones that I have. Alright, next up is the gear. So the first item of gear that the soldier would put on is his leather cartridge box. The cartridge box is a box that houses all the paper cartridges that are used for the muskets, which I'll explain just now. And this goes on your left shoulder so that the buckle badge thing is in the center. As you can see here, the Federal Eagle with arrows in hand. So I have done a big cheat here. Again, buckles go for cheap in the US, but to import it is ridiculous, a nightmare. So I've actually, as a temporary measure, printed them. Look, it's printed. And then laminated. You have to laminate it. And then I've done the same with the buckle for my belt. So this is also what the buckles look like for the Union soldiers. You can see I've printed it and taped on a pin. I know it's bad, I'm sorry future, but please send me a buckle, please. Anyway, so yeah, for now this works just for the image. And what's so interesting is the South being in their predicament, especially later in the war, running out of supplies and shortage of uniforms. the South would take northern belts and simply turn them upside down to write Southern Nation. Interesting, hey? Confederate Union. Confederate Union. Simple. So the belt would go on next, and the belt has the bayonet frog. This is my homemade bayonet frog made out of fake leather, sadly. But they would have looked like this. They would have also had a brass tip at the end to make sure that that sharp, stabby bayonet doesn't poke you. And the belt would go on over the cartridge box, and that basically keeps it in place. Now you would obviously just buckle it simply with your authentic Civil War buckle, but I sadly am using this, so I just simply slot this over, and there we go. Looks like the real deal. Great. Here's your bayonet sitting onto your left side, and then after that, the canteen. Bear with me again, this is my homemade, very rough canteen. Canteens were round like this, but they would have the spouts where you drink from. I literally used a, you know, like those barrels where you put beer in? I'd used a barrel lid, and then a leather strap would be secured all around it. I've just pinched the top here. This I made in a rush. So rather make the leather strap go all the way around, and then the canteen would go on your other shoulder, your right shoulder. There we go. You find that it is official to leave your canteen open so that you can drink with it, because if you put it under your belts, then you can't really. But when you are running away, oh, Confederate limp, Confederate shot me, pins and needles. Look at this thing, look at this thing. So I personally, if I'm on the march or in combat, I will keep this, if I'm in combat, I'll keep this in the belt. But if I am on the march and you need to take a drink, keep this loose. Sadly, it's fake, you can't drink from it, so it's just a decoration. Might as well put it under my belt then. Anyway, I'll leave it out. I'll leave it out. Okay, cool. Next on the list is the knapsack. Here is my homemade knapsack, and yes, it is homemade, okay? You do not. I learned this the hard way in my early days of making my own outfits. You have to have everything guaranteed to not come loose. So this was a new idea I had of making a backpack, but it's secure, it's good. So the knapsack was made black to suit the whole black theme. You know, this was back when America was emo, you know. Anyway, and it was a square-shaped knapsack, and on it you could tie your blankets or your greatcoat. Union greatcoats were also a blue color, so this is my wool blanket, and it is wool. Cool, eh? And the rest is total homemade. Make a plan yourself, as you can see. I used the laptop case for this. Anyway, and what is so cool is many soldiers would attach via straps on the front their little tarp. It was actually a rubberized tarp that they would use to sleep on, to stay dry. They could use it to make tents. So this is my fake tarp. It's I think it is just plastic, not rubber. But this is what it would have looked like, and they would attach those to the front. Cool, eh? And then when you put it on, this is what it looks like. Real Civil War knapsacks would also have an extra strap to tie across the front, and that makes it extra nice and secure. I don't have that, sadly. But still looks really nice nonetheless. Private Gary reporting to fight the rebels. Cool, eh? So, the last item of the gear of a US Civil War soldier is his weapon. This is my homemade Springfield 1861 musket. So, it looks a bit rough, I know. A few reasons. So, I used an actual pattern to make one. I printed it off the internet. I might send the link to the website. And I drew it in the wood and then cut it. Cool, eh? So this is an actual shape and exact size and dimensions of a Springfield 1861 musket. This was the standard rifle for your northern soldiers. The Confederates liked them so much they even took many of them for themselves. The Confederates are using the Enfield rifle, the 1850 something Enfield rifle of British origin. You know, hence the Confederacy try to have Britain help them, which, you know, the rifles, they sort of did help in a way. But yeah, this gun was designed in 1861, the Springfield, and designed in Springfield, Massachusetts. And yeah, as you can see, it's very long, but this is the days of percussion caps. So Napoleon's time, flintlock, you have to prime the pan, and the barrel was smooth. The ball goes out, and after like 50, not even 30, 20 meters, it goes wherever it wants. The rifle is now a new invention. This is why the US Civil War remains to this day one of the deadliest conflicts in American history, because they were using Napoleonic tactics with the newly invented rifle. The rifle is different because inside the barrel, it's not, I haven't done it here, sadly. This is PVC pipe. It would be spiraled all the way along the barrel, so that when your ball is shot out, it's the heat of it moving expanded slightly, which grips those spirals, giving it spin. And now you find that shots can go much further and much more accurate, making the US Civil War the deadliest conflict on American soil. So the 1861 musket, I'm missing a few things. They would have a front notch on the sight, front sights, and a rear sight. Very simple. I'll try put a picture. So also, I sadly don't have the wood tools to make a groove inside here. So the barrel should be a little bit more inside the musket. It's a bit chunky, sticking out this high. But the thing is that I'm taking this in public and I want to keep this looking quite blocky. So that's one reason, as well as I lack a few of the tools to make it fully detailed. I could carve everything to detail, give the grooves here before there and the grips, and then linseed oil, varnish everything. But then it's going to look like a really real gun, and you'll see. Anyway, for now, this suits a good model to do the loading, which I want to show you how to work this thing. So, oh, and check here, also the flag. Cool, eh? I'll even pop my flag on like this when I'm marching about. People love it. Do you find people are very intrigued by this outfit? Anyway, so how to operate the Springfield 1861 rifled musket. These are the days of still muzzle loading, but the brass cartridge has been invented, but used in small numbers. So everyone's pretty much mostly using the musket. So you've just fired, bang! Step number one is you reach into your cartridge box, pull out a paper cartridge. I sadly don't have any, but they were about this size, so yeah. You'd reach out, grab your paper cartridge, tear off the front, spit out the tip. The paper cartridge contains your gunpowder and your mini ball. Your mini ball is basically the next step in evolution from the musket ball, which was round. The mini ball is more of a pointy shape, and it specially hooks into the rifle grooves. You would pour that all down into the barrel, and your mini ball, stuff it in. I'm not actually going to shoot gunpowder mini ball, sadly, so anyway. Then, one inaccuracy is the ramrod should be right over here. My ramrod, sadly, is inside the barrel, made out of another smaller PVC pipe. So I'm going to trick you in that I cover here and act like I'm pulling the ramrod where it belongs. So you take your ramrod, flip it around, ram down home the mini ball and gunpowder, and back and put it back in its slot. Yes. Oh yeah, I think the Union's getting desperate, issued with these guns that don't even shoot. And then after that, another piece of gear that I'm missing, you would have it right over here on your belt, is the cap pouch. So instead of flintlock where you have to prime the pan, now it's just a little nipple over there that you take your cap, your percussion cap, stick it on the little nipple over there as it's called, cock the hammer to full cock, and you're ready. Bang! In full motion, I will show you what it looks like. Your average soldier was expected to get off 2 to 3 shots per minute. You're going to time me, and I'm going to try get as many shots off as I can. I'll get 3 shots off, and let's see how long that takes. Cool. Primed and ready. Okay, so ready. We've just shot and bang! Bang! Oh. Bang! Bang! There we go. Fun, hey? I've seen sources in the Napoleonic times especially, they would stuff the whole cartridge down because the paper acts as the wadding which keeps the ball in place. But I've seen a guy firing one of these without putting in the paper cartridge, just stuffs it all down. The mini ball is tight enough that it stays. So you tell me. The order would be given to fix bayonets if they were close enough to the enemy, so I shall show you. And I'm bleeding somehow. Wow, it's dangerous. Fix bayonets. Okay, mine gets stuck. DIY pouches. And there we go, bayonets fixed. Yeah. So, this is my homemade bayonet, and I know this looks even more DIY than the musket itself. But that's because I do not want it to look like a real sharp thing on the end of a gun. So this bayonet is homemade, but it's made to the right size, 21 inches. Okay, it's actually shorter because the socket should be longer, but it sits right at the edge, so then this is long enough. And yeah, it obviously would be sharp. But yeah, your bayonet was a very, very important weapon. In Napoleonic times, it killed more people than the musket shot itself. In Civil War times, not so much so, but it played a psychological role in the US Civil War. If you are up against a whole bunch of Confederates or Yankees with bayonets running at you, that is terrifying. See, it's plastic, it wobbles a bit, sorry. So overall now your musket is accurate length with bayonet fixed, and look what happens when you now march like this. Oh my goodness, it's long. Howdy there, future.
How's it?
It's doing a Civil War video, yes?
See.
You're not Confederates, are you? You're wearing gray, huh?
Yep.
Oh, it's fine. I'll let you get away this time. Oh. So look at how long this is, eh? Marching with this. Oh, there go the trees. There go the trees. Oh, there go the trees. At least it means we can harvest the leaves. Yeah, I find that by modern standards, this is very long. But that reach might just save your life. So yeah, interesting. And it was designed so that you can load without being hindered because the bayonet is offset. Cool, eh? So, now it's time for the fun part, the food part. Oh my gosh, I've got such a surprise for you. Give me a minute. I'll even pause here. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the rations for one day for a soldier of the Union Army.
It's early in the morning when the birds sing in the pine.
As we can see, I have meted everything to the exact specifications of the records. This is all at credit for Civil War Digital Digest YouTube channel. They are the ones whose video I saw about US rations and the Civil War. And thank you guys are awesome. So I'll put a link to their great stuff there too. So over here we have hardtack, salt pork, potatoes, sugar, tea, coffee, salt. And what are these two things? Soap and it's running away, candle. Okay, you're probably thinking to me so you're probably thinking, what? Why would they give such a tiny little candle and a tiny little bar of soap? So, how these rations work is they are based on soldiers per 100 men. So these are issued per 100 men, save for the salt pork and hardtack. The rest is, per 100 men. And I've divided that number by 100, and this is what it equates to. This is what you'd get then per day. What's that there? Are they telling me now there are ironclads in the sky? Ironclads in the sky. Dadgum. Let's put the good old flag. You might recognize there are 34 stars on this flag. This is the accurate flag. So there were only 34 states in the 1860s. And funny enough, the star for the state of Texas and Virginia and Georgia and all the southern states are still there because the North simply viewed it as being an illegal rebellion. Anyway, join me as we eat now. So, I have meted everything out, and this is what each man would have gotten. Pretty cool, eh? The hardtack, I've got three different types. These are pretty much just crackers. This is a bit more like it. And inside here, I have rye. This also looks quite like it, you know. It's so tightly packed. There we go. That's a bit more like it. This whole thing filled. This is how much hardtack a soldier ate in a day would be getting each day. Reason being is you need the calories when marching and building camps and living out in the open. You also want some flag? Oh, yes. There. Looks better now. Civil War hardtack was very basic. I'll try to put a picture. All hardtack is wheat and salt. So wheat and salt baked, and yeah, it lasts so long. It's really versatile stuff. That's why they'd be issued. And now each day, imagine, all this hardtack. Goodness me, huh? That's quite a lot of hardtack, yeah? Look at that. It gets a bit dry, eh? So, the thing is that you would want to eat your hardtack with something else. And this brings me to the rest of the food. Over here, I have salt pork that I've prepared. What is salt pork, you might be wondering? Salt pork was the staple diet. Hardtack and salt pork was the staple diet of the US soldier in the US Civil War. Salt pork on its own looks like this. Okay, let me just get it out for you. So the thing is that salt pork is essentially cuts of pork that's heavily drenched in salt everywhere, and this preserves it. So it's great for a marching army, but it's raw. So it's a bit concerning that soldiers were handling this raw pork all the time. So I don't want to touch it too much since it is raw, because I don't know if they had tapeworm back then, but this is salt pork. Look at that. How cool is that? Take a close look. There we go. That's salt pork. Raw cuts of pork in salt. How to prepare it? How do you get from this to this? So there are many sources on how to cook it. The source that I saw was basically a veteran, Private CV. He recommended that you soak it for 3 hours and then boil it for 3 hours, because the soaking gets rid of that salt. You want to get rid of as much of that salt as you can. It's recommended to scrape all the salt off of it. Scrape it all off with your cutlery or your bayonets or whatever, and then you soak it for 3 hours. Get rid of the gunky water, and then you put in cold water in a pot over the fire and bring it all up to boil. And then for 3 hours, you don't want to like heavy boil it, so you sort of like gently boil it. That's what I did. 3 hours. So I actually soaked it overnight. So let's going to find out if you soak it overnight. You never know. Maybe the regiment had time and they left it overnight. And then you boil it for 3 hours. So I boiled it for 3 hours, and here we are. It's my first time eating salt pork. Let's join me. Oh yeah. I don't know if that's me with hours of marching and not having eaten since the morning, or if it's just really good. You see, I like to be like full immersion. It's the whole day just out marching. I've collectively marched hundreds of miles in this uniform. Yeah, my shoes testify to it. It used to be hobnailed. It has no more hobnails. So shoes in the US Civil War would generally be hobnailed. So all these little nails stick in. That extends their life. As you can see, that's what happens after a lot of marching. You lose your hobnails first, then you lose your sole. So with the salt pork, I could have my ration of salt with it. So what I could do is prepare some hardtack, then some salt pork. This is like basic. If you can't, sometimes you'd even mash your hardtack into like a porridge type of thing. And then this is my ration of salt for the day. Sprinkle some salt on there, some more hardtack, and then wait for it.
He packed in the animals 2 by 2, ox, camel, and a kangaroo. Packed him in that box so tight, I couldn't get no sleep that night. Roll the sun, chip and ham.
This is actually quite tasty. I'm even going to undo my buckle. Yeah. That's better. I can relax a bit more now. So yeah, there we go. That is hardtack and salt pork.
Tomorrow we go into battle. All right. So Lordy,
hungry,
let me fight with the rifle in one hand and good book in the other.
This is actually really tasty. The salt pork, the hardtack go very nicely together. You do want to drink with this. It helps wash it down. Although I made the salt pork quite nicely. 3 hours of boiling, just light boiling, and a whole night of soaking before that. There is zero extra salt. I needed to add more salt. So it's actually the perfect combo. This is a lovely combo. What's odd is just how much hardtack there is to salt pork. Okay, granted I have 0.2 kilograms of pork versus half a kilogram of salt pork. The original ration was 0.36 kilograms. To ounces and pounds, I'll put the whole conversions up there. Yeah. But nonetheless, hardtack, I'm not using historically accurate hardtack. I'm using literally just wheat crackers that I found at the shops, but it is the exact same ingredients. I specially chose, these were expensive, the only wheat, only salt, not those additives. So this is the taste of hardtack. Maybe those experts out there will know how much they use rye versus normal white wheat. You tell me. That's interesting to know. Then your soldier, of course, could have a ration of coffee to go with this. Here's the tea ration. They're pretty much the same. This will equate to a cup of tea and a cup of coffee, and you can even add just about nearly 2 teaspoons of sugar. That's how much it equates to. Or be weird like me and actually wouldn't mind a cup of hot tea, with some sugar. I prefer the tea black, but sugar now after not eating in the day. Oh yeah. So the soap and the candle, I measured and calculated that this is how much soap and how much candle, you can say, that each soldier got in a day. They would be given about 1/2 kilogram of candles for the whole 100 men. And I calculated this is how much one guy gets in a day. It's not a lot, So you would generally find that they would rather prioritize the officers with candles, and the men could get like a big candle to share. But yeah, this is just to show you in a visual representation, and this much soap. It's actually a decent amount. You could actually give yourself a full wash with this amount of soap, but what would probably happen is, like I say, bulk for the 100 men, and they would probably all divide that just a bit and then share a bar of soap amongst everyone should they reach a river, which is not every day. I mean, luckily I have a river here. But yeah, and you think you also need to wash your hair. There's no shampoo in the US Civil War, so this is for your whole body in one day. It's doable. Sugar, hardtack, salt pork, it's good. I love it. There's so much infamy around war rations, but not for me. Food is food. And also potato. This is also per 100 men, but would equate to roughly this size potato per day. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I did the calculations. I had a headache with converting ounces to grams and quarters and pounds and kilograms. But yeah, this is about how much per day. So you could get a potato each day. So this is literally it. This is what you would eat for the whole day. It's doable, but there are essential things missing in the diet, and hence the foraging part comes in. I found some things. So, fruits and vegetables were treasured, prized, because this stops scurvy. An orange in the day will prevent scurvy, and scurvy literally took many, many soldiers in the US Civil War down. It's very sad. Salt pork, vegetables, even sailors way before this was a thing. So yeah, you'd be lucky to go around, maybe if you are liberating the South, as I would be doing, later in the war, 1863, middle of the war, later, sort of. And we're marching through Georgia or Virginia. And yeah, we come across some homesteads, we will pillage them and take the fruits and veg. And yeah, even some eggs as well. So, where's my bayonet? I mean, where's my bayonet? I hope my north versus south accent is somewhat adequate. Fruit and veg were super important, and many generals would try and issue their troops their vitamins, but sometimes you'd have to go and forage it yourself, you know. You don't eat an orange like this, or like an egg or something. I thought that was raw. I mean, boiled. I thought I boiled this egg. Pardon me. Sorry guys, I wasted an egg. I thought that was boiled. I thought I boiled that this morning. Oh man. Okay, well, this thing can be washed. And the scabbard. We'll forget that happened. Anyway, so yeah, vitamins and extras. And then another aspect, soldiers could be sent things from home. I've got jam. Hardtack and jam are a treat. There you go, US Civil War stuff. Oh, and one more thing I forgot that they were issued, per 100 men that is molasses. I've got pure molasses here. They were issued this much molasses in a day. I'll show you now. I have to wait for it to slowly go down. Roughly 2 of these spoons that I've measured up here. So yeah, 2 spoons of molasses. A little less than this. This is a 5 milliliter teaspoon measurement. And molasses is nice. It's sweet, so you could even mix it in with the hardtack. Why not? Yeah, gives a break. If you have got no jam, molasses works. There's one more thing we have left to do. You know, I could just, it's beautiful, eh? I literally have my own version of time traveling, and honestly, this is one of the closest ways to get to time traveling. I think the closest way is video and film. But video and film were only invented in the 19th century. So we have pictures from the US Civil War, and I encourage you to go check out pictures from then. They played a big role in the Union's attitude to the war as well. But after that is literally putting yourself in their shoes, eating what they ate, and hearing what they heard. There's a legend of something called the Rebel Yell. The Rebel Yell is basically what the rebels used to cry before battle. It became quite a thing. So much so that the Union troops were really shaken by it. Hey? If they heard the Rebel Yell, they knew something bad was going to happen. So we don't... Okay. No, we do know what the Rebel Yell sounded like. Although it's technically not an original account, but it actually is original. So there was a gentleman interviewed in 1930, 30 was it? I'll put up the details. He fought in the US Civil War, but by the 1930s he was a very old man, and he, for a radio broadcast, was asked to give the Rebel Yell. I will play it for you, and I'm going to be a Union, scared to death, hearing that Rebel Yell. So imagine, you're just here, you know, la la la, eating your rations. Imagine how terrifying that would be, eh? Imagine. So, I played the sound of a group of people that reenacted it based on the original recording. I'll play the original recording right now for you. So quite cool, eh? Quite amazing. So I'll try to do it myself when I'm a Confederate, alright? Which means, yeah, I must do a Confederate video. Anyway, that'll come up later. A tip, another tip for reenacting, do Union first. If you want to do both, do Union first, because the Confederates took a lot of Union gear for themselves. So once you've done Union, you can already, even the caps, they were using navy blue cappies sometimes. The belts, the equipment, everything, but yeah, you would risk getting shot by your own people if you wear the full uniform, but yeah, they would steal bits and bobs. Well, thank you for joining me on this time travel back to 1863. Thank you. And more to come, more to come. I hope you enjoyed, and sorry for any inaccuracies, especially buttonholes and all these things. But I'm also learning, I do my best. So yeah, thank you very much, future, and yeah, cheers. I'm gonna have myself a nice salt pork hardtack sandwich with my salt ration and my coffee ration, my tea ration, sugar ration, and my soap ration, candle ration, and let's go. General Grant, sir! Born for duty, sir. The Confederates have been subdued. We've got them straight through the Mississippi. We extracted them with the atomic lamp. We'll have them home by Christmas. Yes, sir? Sir? Oh my God! Whew. There's a statue. Whew. Sorry, you saw nothing. You saw nothing.